don't believe in a God who's imposing a system of ethical rules, then you have to have some other way to answer the question of why be a good person. And so we talked specifically about this question of enlightened self-interest. Is enlightened self-interest a good foundation for ethics? And the gut response of many of the people who were at the session on Saturday was, well, if it had just said self-interest, we would say no. Is self-interest a good foundation? Well, for a libertarian it is. In fact, a libertarian would argue that it's the only foundation for ethics because only you can know what you want. I can't tell you what you want. I shouldn't tell you what's good for you. You make up your own mind. You're in charge of your own life. And ideally, if every person self-actualizes, then it would work out fine. That's again, the ideal, homo economicus version of people making purely rational decisions and having equal capabilities and starting from an equal place. You have a little bit more subtle understanding of how society works and how people work. So that's where that word enlightened comes in, because it gives you a sense of a broader picture. My enlightened self-interest says maybe I shouldn't pollute at the top of the river because it's going to hurt people downstream who may get mad at me. And it may also affect my environment too. The wind could shift, the flow could shift, and then I'm up the creek, so to speak. So this is why we try to find a balance between individual self-actualization and collective need and responsibility. And what we do as individuals affects other people, and what the group chooses to do affects us. If you were fully group-oriented, it would be a socialist, communist world where the individual makes no difference. And if the individual gets in the way of what's good for the collective, squish them. That's what happens in Maoist China and Stalinist Russia. On the other hand, if you're purely individualism, it's anarchy. It doesn't work either. Look at the libertarian paradise of Nicaragua, or Panama, or some other places where they have very limited civil states and a limited sense of group allegiance, and society simply can't function. So we have to find some ground in between the two that gives us a sense of individual autonomy, but also collective need and responsibility. Well, one of the challenges with ethics is whether you do what's right because somebody's watching you, out of a fear of punishment or hope for reward, or do you do it because you think about what effect it will have on other people and on yourself, on your sense of self? I mean, sometimes we do good not because of any benefit to us. We do it because it helps our sense of self. We feel better about ourselves if we're doing this thing. If I give money to Amnesty International, I highly doubt I'm ever going to be using their services at any point in the future. Maybe a little bit more likely now than it used to be, but even so, it's still very, very unlikely, all right? But I like what they do, and I feel like I'm doing something important by supporting their work. I don't do it because I feel like I'm earning points up above that are going to atone for other things I do wrong. It's not like someone's keeping score.
That's you, because you're...
I know, I understand.
Yeah,
So the question then becomes whether you need a cosmic version of that, or if there can be human versions of that. After all, we often enforce moral behavior on each other, whether it's neighborhoods, or families, or loving partners, or police systems and courts on some minimal level. So we try to create a society that functions using the tools of observance and reward and punishment. But we also hope that when people are making moral and ethical decisions, they're relying on something within themselves as well. I mean, even the most religious are not watching out for lightning bolts, hitting them when they do something wrong right away. They sometimes will find rationales afterward.
Yes.
And that actually has a downside too. I mean, I'm not saying they can't believe that way, but all too often you'll have a disaster happen, and then they'll add to the suffering of the disaster the guilt of what did I do wrong?
Right. Yeah, I'm not saying...
I must be suffering. If the universe is just and I'm suffering, I must have done something wrong. That's how the ultra-Orthodox community explains the Holocaust. It was a punishment for assimilation. It was a punishment for not being strict enough. So ultra-Orthodox communities are even more strict now than they were 50 or 100 years ago because of that thought process. I mean, they've even, there's a book that came out recently that documented how the books that are published today in the ultra-Orthodox world have gone back and doctored the photographs of the wives of rabbis to show them with longer sleeves and different head coverings, because the standards today are stricter than the standards were 1,500 years ago, and they don't want to undermine people's faith that this is the way we've always done it, because that's how they run. So this is one of our challenges. We don't have to impose our sense of morality on others. One of the sub-questions we didn't talk about now, but we did talk about yesterday, is this question of if God belief is useful for people, why take it away? We're not out here to take it away. We're not picketing synagogues saying, free yourself. But
That's not true,
but
some do.
I don't think anybody in this congregation pickets other synagogues.
No, they don't. But the community then.
Okay, so then maybe that requires some being a nice person. But at the same time, we don't have to be apologetic about what we do that serves our needs.
Right.
The way that we explain these kind of questions that responds to the tragedy, but also doesn't add a layer of guilt. And at the same time, all true, but there's also something to be said for the power of self-actualization. The person who is able to overcome a particular issue that they've grappled with through their own effort and ingenuity. And they do feel like a, quote, self-made person, where they've achieved, and we think about even in the Jewish experience of coming to this country. Most Jews came to this country, they had some literacy, they might have had some technical skills, they had often had very limited resources. And it was through hard effort and work they were able to ultimately accumulate wealth. They had the advantage of, at a certain point in time, being accepted as white, not initially, but post-war, for example, they were eligible for federal housing grants and the GI Bill, where African Americans weren't eligible for some of those programs. In fact, Levittown, which is the classic example of suburbia and moving out, that was a white restricted community. Jews were allowed in, but black families were not. With the name Levitt on it, isn't that nice? But this is, again, we had some social circumstances that helped, and we had some hard work that helped too. So I wouldn't, I would find both pieces to that. It requires some introspection, some connection to others, but we also need to encourage people to muster their own powers and to work for their own benefit and success. It's not the only way you can be successful, but it is an important ingredient to that sense of self-confidence. And the other thing that it allows you to do is that it helps you to help other people. What you realize when you really have a sense of your own power and capability and confidence is that helping someone else doesn't really take away from you. It adds to your sense of your ability to help other people. I was struck by a story that's told by Lynn Gottlieb, who was one of the first conservative rabbis in the country, where she had a family come to her who was having money issues. And she said to this family, I want you to take a little box, a stock box, put it on your counter, and put a little bit of money in the box every day. And then once a month go and donate that somewhere else. And they said to her, did you not listen to what we were saying? We're having problems with money. And she said, don't worry, try this. And it turns out, you might guess the end of the story, they were able to do this and they were able to help. And it wasn't the case that, oh, there's someone worse off than me, I feel better now because they're suffering more. It was that they felt that they had the power to help other people. And that gave them the sense of confidence to feel like they had the power to help themselves too. So it is this sense of interconnection that can paradoxically help our sense of self at the same time.